They say that justice is blind, but in the Silver Moon Kingdom, justice had teeth. Alpha King Alaric Valen did not believe in gray areas. He did not believe in mitigating circumstances. He believed in the law of the claw. If you hunt with the pack, you eat. If you betray the pack, you bleed. For 10 years, Alaric had ruled with a cold, terrifying perfection. He had purged the borders of rogues. He had executed corrupt elders. He had turned the Silver Moon into the most feared military power on the continent. He told himself that his ruthlessness was a necessity. He told himself that a king who listened to his heart was a king who would bury his people. But tonight, standing on the edge of the black rock precipice, with the wind whipping his cloak and the ocean churning 1,000 feet below, Alaric was about to learn the difference between the law of men and the law of gods. He looked down at the traitor kneeling in the dirt. Isolde, the mute Omega from the archives, the girl with hair like spun starlight and eyes that had haunted his dreams for 3 years, ever since he privately rejected their fated bond because a king could not be mated to a defective mute. He thought he was cutting out a cancer. He thought he was executing a spy who had sold their secrets to the rogues. He didn't know that he was holding a knife to the throat of the moon itself. And when the blade fell, the sky would not forgive him. The black rock precipice was the end of the world. It was a jagged finger of obsidian jutting out over the storm-washed sea, a place where the waves smashed against the cliffs with enough force to shake the earth. It was the traditional place of execution for the Silver Moon Pack. There were no graves for traitors here. There was only the fall and the sea. Alpha King Alaric Valen stood at the edge of the abyss. He was a statue carved from war and duty, his face impassive, his posture rigid. He wore the ceremonial armor of judgment, black steel inlaid with silver runes, and the heavy fur cloak of the Alpha Prime. But beneath the armor, his skin was prickling. His wolf, a massive beast of shadow and rage, was pacing in the back of his mind, whining low and mournful. "Stop!" the wolf urged. "Mate, no." Alaric shoved the instinct down with an iron will. He had practiced this suppression for years. He told himself it was biology trying to override logic. The bond was a chemical trick. The evidence was real. "Bring her forward," Alaric commanded, his voice fighting the roar of the wind. 2 warriors dragged Isolde toward the edge. She didn't struggle. She was small, frail-looking, in her simple gray Omega tunic. Her hands were bound behind her back with heavy iron chains. Her feet were bare and bleeding from the sharp rocks of the path. They forced her to her knees 5 feet from the drop. Isolde raised her head. The wind whipped her pale hair across her face, but she didn't blink. She looked at Alaric. Her eyes were large, a startling luminous violet. They were eyes that seemed to see too much, eyes that had always made Alaric feel exposed, even when he was fully armored. Standing just behind Alaric was Lady Mara. She was beautiful, dressed in mourning black that was cut just low enough to be alluring. She dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "It breaks my heart, my king," Mara whispered, loud enough for the council elders to hear, "to think that someone we trusted, someone so quiet, could be capable of such treachery. To sell the location of the nursery to the Rot-Tooth rogues, it is monstrous." Alaric's jaw tightened. The nursery plot. That was the crime. Documents detailing the secret location of the pack's pups had been found in Isolde's bedding. A rogue, captured on the border, had confessed under Mara's interrogation that the Silent One was their informant. The evidence was overwhelming. The logic was sound. "Isolde of the Archives," Alaric announced, his voice booming so the hundreds of gathered wolves could hear. "You stand accused of high treason. You are accused of conspiring with the rot-toothed rogues to slaughter the next generation of this pack." The crowd growled. It was an ugly sound, a wave of hatred rolling off the assembled wolves. They hated her. They feared for their pups. "The penalty for this crime is the wolf's end," Alaric continued, staring into those violet eyes. "Death by the sea. Your name will be struck from the records. Your scent will be purged from the lands." He paused. This was the part of the ritual where the accused was allowed to speak, to beg, to confess. "Do you have anything to say?" Alaric asked. It was a cruel question. Everyone knew she was mute. She had no voice. She had never spoken a word in her 20 years of life. Isolde looked at him. She didn't look at the angry crowd. She didn't look at the drop. She looked only at him. In her gaze, Alaric didn't see guilt. He didn't see fear. He saw a profound, crushing sadness. She looked at him like a mother watching a child run toward a fire. She shook her head slowly. Then she shifted her gaze to Lady Mara. For a second, Mara flinched. The smugness on the noblewoman's face cracked, revealing a flash of pure, venomous panic. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the mask of the grieving patriot. "She has no defense because there is none," Mara hissed. "Finish it, Alaric. The pack demands safety." Alaric looked back at Isolde. The bond in his chest was screaming now. It felt like his own heart was being ripped out. "She is yours," the voice whispered. "She is innocent." "She is a traitor," Alaric's logic countered. "She is a defect. A king cannot love a mute. A king cannot spare a spy." He hardened his heart. He drew his sword, not to strike, but to signal. "The law is absolute," Alaric declared. He nodded to the guards. "Cast her down." The guards stepped forward. They grabbed Isolde by the shoulders. She didn't scream. She didn't try to dig her heels into the dirt. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her body go limp. They shoved her. Isolde tipped backward into the void. Alaric watched her fall. Time seemed to stretch into an agonizing eternity. He saw her gray dress fluttering in the wind. He saw her hair fanning out like a halo. She fell silently, a small speck of gray against the massive black cliff face. He waited for the splash. He waited for the satisfaction of justice done. He waited for the safety of his kingdom to be secured. Isolde hit the water. Splash. The white foam of the churning sea swallowed her instantly, and then the world broke. It happened faster than a heartbeat. High above, the full moon, which had been a brilliant milky white orb dominating the night sky, changed. It didn't fade. It didn't cloud over. It bled. A wave of crimson washed over the celestial body, turning it the color of fresh arterial blood. The light, casting down on the black rock precipice, shifted from silver to a horrific rusty red. The wind stopped. The ocean stopped churning. A terrible, suffocating silence slammed into the earth. Alaric blinked, looking up at the blood moon. What? Then the scream hit him. It wasn't a sound from the outside. It was a sound from the inside. Every wolf on the cliff, warriors, elders, commoners, doubled over simultaneously. Ah! A collective shriek of agony tore through the pack. Alaric dropped his sword. He clutched his chest, falling to his knees. It felt like a hook had been inserted into his soul and was being ripped out through his ribs. His wolf, The alpha spirit that gave him his strength, his speed, and his command howled in terror. It was being dragged away. "Hilario, help! Darkness!" "No," Alaric gasped, vomiting a mouthful of blood onto the black rocks. "Fight it!" He tried to shift. He tried to call upon the armor of fur and claw to stop the pain, but the shift didn't come. Instead, he felt the spiritual connection sever. It was a physical snap, loud as a breaking bone in his ears. The presence in his mind, the wolf that had been his companion since birth, vanished. Silence, hollow, empty, human silence. Alaric gasped, staring at his hands. They were shaking. They looked small, pale, weak. He couldn't smell the salt in the air anymore. He couldn't hear the heartbeats of the men next to him. His night vision flickered and died, leaving him half blind in the red gloom. He looked around. The mighty silver moon pack was writhing in the dirt. Lady Mara was clawing at her face, screaming, "My beauty, my skin, it's loose, it's old." Without the regenerating magic of her wolf, the years she had held at bay were crashing down on her. Her skin sagged, wrinkles carving deep valleys into her face in seconds. General Kale, the strongest warrior in the army, was lying on his back, weeping. "It's gone," he sobbed. "The wolf is gone. I am just meat." Alaric forced himself to stand. His legs were wobbly. He felt heavy, anchored by gravity in a way he hadn't felt since he was a child. "Stand up," Alaric croaked. His voice lacked the alpha command. It was just a man shouting in the wind. "Stand up! What is happening?" "The moon!" an elder screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the sky. "She is bleeding! We have killed her! We have killed the goddess!" Alaric looked at the blood moon. The red light bathed the scene in a nightmare hue. And then, from the tree line at the edge of the precipice, a sound emerged. It was a howl. But it wasn't the howl of a silver moon wolf. It was a discordant, jagged, insane howl. The howl of a creature that did not worship the moon, but something darker. The rot-toothed rogues. They stepped out of the shadows. They were massive, mangy, scarred beasts. Their eyes glowed yellow and green, and they were shifted. They still had their wolves. The curse had only hit the silver moon pack. The innocent, the righteous. A massive rogue, drool dripping from his jaws, stepped onto the clearing. He looked at the king, the human, weak king, and the hundreds of defenseless humans writhing on the ground. The rogue didn't speak. He laughed, a wet, guttural, barking laugh. "Defend!" Alaric shouted, reaching for his sword. But the sword was heavy now, clumsy. "Form a line!" Nobody moved. They were too busy screaming from the phantom pain of their severed souls. The rogues charged. It wasn't a battle. It was a harvest. The rogues tore into the crowd of former wolves, men and women who had been apex predators 5 minutes ago, were tossed aside like rag dolls. Without their shifts, without their speed, they were nothing. Alaric swung his sword, clumsily deflecting a rogue's claw that aimed for his throat. The impact jarred his arm all the way to the shoulder, knocking him backward. "Retreat!" Alaric screamed. "To the caves! Get inside!" General Kale managed to rally a few guards. They fired crossbows, human weapons they rarely used, into the mass of fur. It slowed the rogues, buying them seconds. "The elder!" Alaric shouted, grabbing Kale by the collar. "Get the high priestess! We need to know what we did!" They dragged the pack elder, a woman named Alara, away from the slaughter, retreating down the narrow path that led to the sea caves. They barricaded themselves in the upper cavern, listening to the screams of their packmates dying above. In the dim red light of the cavern, Alaric grabbed Alara. The old woman was shaking, clutching a scroll she had pulled from her robes. "What is this?" Alaric demanded, shaking her. "Why did the moon turn? Why did we lose our wolves?" Alara looked at him with eyes full of horror. "The anchor," she whispered. "You cut the anchor." "What anchor?" Alaric yelled. "Speak sense." "Isolde," Alara cried. "She wasn't a traitor, you fool. She was the moon anchor." Alaric froze. "Moon anchor? That is a myth?" "It is not a myth." Alara unrolled the scroll. It showed a drawing of a wolf falling into the sea and the moon bleeding above. Every generation, the goddess chooses a vessel, a pure soul to tether her magic to the land. The anchor bears the weight of the pack's sins in silence. That is why she couldn't speak, Alaric. Her voice was the moon's voice. Alaric staggered back, hitting the cavern wall. She was mute because she was holy. She was the physical connection between us and the goddess. Alara wept. As long as she lived, the pack was blessed. Strength, speed, dominance. It all flowed through her. Alara pointed a bony finger at the king. "You threw our connection to the divine off a cliff. You severed the line. The goddess has withdrawn her blessing because you murdered her daughter." Alaric slid down the wall. The realization hit him harder than any physical blow. Isolde, the gentle girl who brought him tea. The girl whose eyes followed him with such sadness. The girl he had rejected because she wasn't strong enough. She was the source of all their strength. And he had killed her. "Mara," Alaric whispered, his eyes narrowing. "Mara found the evidence. Mara told me Mara wanted the crown." Kyle spat, reloading his crossbow. "And now she has doomed us all." The screams above were dying down. The rogues were finishing their work. Soon they would smell the survivors in the cave. "We are dead," Kyle said, his voice flat. "We are humans fighting monsters. We cannot win." Alaric looked at his hands. Useless, weak hands. He looked at the opening of the cave where the red moonlight spilled in. "No," Alaric said. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the cave mouth. The path continued down, down to the sea, down to the jagged rocks where the waves crashed. "Where are you going?" Alara asked. "It is suicide." "I have to find her," Alaric said. "She fell 1,000 feet, Alaric," Kyle shouted. "She is meat for the sharks. She is dead." "If she is dead, I will bury her and beg the goddess for mercy," Alaric said, tightening his belt. "But if she is the anchor, if she is truly the daughter of the moon, then maybe she survived." He looked back at his broken commander and his weeping priestess. "Hold the entrance," Alaric commanded. "I am going down the sea-tooth path." "You can't," Kale said. "Without your wolf, you'll slip. You'll die." Alaric looked at the red moon. "I am already dead," Alaric said grimly. "I died the moment I gave that order." He stepped out onto the ledge. The wind tried to push him off. The rain was slick on the rocks. He was just a man, fragile and slow, descending into the throat of the angry ocean. He began to climb down. Every inch of skin he scraped, every muscle that burned, was a penance. He was going to find Isolde, and if he found her, he wasn't going to be a king. He was going to be a beggar. Gravity is a cruel master when you don't have claws. For 10 years, Alaric Valen had scaled these cliffs as a rite of passage. In his wolf form, he could bound up the vertical face of the black rock precipice in minutes, his claws sinking into the stone like pitons, his muscles driving him upward with explosive power. He had always felt weightless, a creature of air and stone. Now he was just meat hanging on a hook. Alaric clung to the sheer face of the sea-tooth path, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the slick, wet obsidian. The rain, which had turned torrential the moment the moon bled, hammered against his back. It washed the blood from his scalp into his eyes, blinding him. His fingers were raw meat. He had lost 2 fingernails in the last 50 feet of descent. His shoulders screamed with a lactic burn that felt like fire. He gasped for air, his human lungs burning in the cold, salt spray air. Above him, the screams of his pack were dying out. The silence that replaced them was worse. It meant the rogues had finished the first wave of butchery. It meant his people were either dead or hiding, shivering in the dark without their pelts to keep them warm. "Hold on," Alaric gritted out between clenched teeth. "Just hold on." He reached for a handhold, a jagged spur of rock he remembered from his youth. But his human depth perception was flawed in the dim red light. He misjudged the distance. His hand closed on empty air. Alaric slipped. He fell 10 feet, his body slamming against the unforgiving stone face of the cliff. He tumbled past a ledge, flailing wildly. His hand snagged on a thick, gnarled root protruding from a fissure. Snap! The sudden stop nearly dislocated his shoulder. A scream of pure agony tore from his throat. A human scream, thin and pathetic against the roar of the ocean below. He hung there, dangling by one arm over the churning red surf. His legs kicked at the empty air. He looked down. The ocean was a boiling cauldron of crimson foam. The reflection of the blood moon made the water look like a vat of visceral fluid. It was terrifying. "Is this how you felt?" Alaric whispered to the wind, thinking of Isolde. "When I ordered them to push you, did you feel this small?" The memory of the execution played on a loop in his mind, the way she hadn't screamed, the way she had looked at him. She wasn't mute because she was broken. The elder's voice echoed in his head. She was mute because she was holy. Alaric hauled himself up, his bicep trembling violently. He managed to get a boot onto the ledge. He collapsed against the rock face, pressing his forehead against the cold stone, sobbing for breath. He wasn't crying from pain. He was crying from the crushing weight of his own stupidity. He had built a kingdom on logic. He had measured every decision by the metric of strength, and in doing so, he had become the weakest thing in his entire domain. He had murdered the battery that kept the lights on. "I am coming," Alaric groaned, forcing himself to stand on the narrow ledge. "I am coming to beg." He continued the descent. It took him an hour to cover what used to take him minutes. By the time his boots hit the black sand of the cove at the bottom of the cliff, Alaric was a wreck. His ceremonial armor was dented and scraped, weighing him down. He unbuckled the breastplate and let it drop into the sand. He didn't deserve to wear the king's steel. He stood on the beach. The tide was high, crashing against the rocks with a deafening rhythm. The spray was cold enough to freeze the marrow in his bones. He scanned the shoreline. The wreckage of the cliff fall was scattered everywhere. Boulders, driftwood, seaweed. "Isolde!" Alaric shouted. His voice was swallowed instantly by the wind. He began to run along the shoreline, stumbling in the heavy, wet sand. He checked every dark shape, a log, a pile of kelp, a dead seal. Panic began to set in, real, icy panic. If the ocean had taken her, if she had been swept out to sea, then there was no body to bury. There was no way to ask for forgiveness. The pack would remain human forever. They would be slaughtered by the rogues, or enslaved, or simply die of exposure. "Please," Alaric prayed, falling to his knees in the surf. "Moon goddess, mother, I know I have failed, I know I am arrogant, but do not punish them for my sin. Give her back to me." He looked up at the blood moon. It stared back, an unblinking red eye of judgment. Then he saw it. About 200 yards down the beach, there was a sea cave. It was known as the Weeping Grotto, a place where the tide rushed in and out, creating a mournful whistling sound. But tonight, the grotto wasn't dark. A faint, pulsating light was emanating from the cave mouth. It wasn't the red light of the cursed moon. It was a soft, pearlescent white light, the color of the old moon, the color of Isolde's hair. Alaric scrambled to his feet. He ran toward the light. He fell, scraped his palms, got up, and ran again. He reached the entrance of the cave. The water was waist-deep here, swirling around his legs. He waded in, fighting the current. The inside of the cave was like a cathedral of salt and stone. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like chandeliers. And there, in the center of the cavern, lying on a raised shelf of rock that was just above the high tide mark, was Isolde. She was not dead, but she was not the girl he had thrown off the cliff. She was glowing. Her gray servant's dress had been torn away by the fall and the sea, but she was clothed in light. A shimmering, translucent aura wrapped around her body like a shroud of white fire. Her skin was flawless. The bruises from the guard's grip were gone. The cuts from the rocks were healed. She lay on her back, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm. But the most terrifying thing was the water around her. The ocean outside was red, but inside the cave, wherever the light of her body touched the water, the redness receded. The water turned clear and blue, purified by her mere presence. "Isolde!" Alaric breathed. He waded toward the rock shelf. He felt unworthy to step into the circle of her light. The closer he got, the more his skin tingled. It wasn't the warm, fuzzy feeling of the mate bond anymore. It was the hum of raw nuclear power. He reached the edge of the rock. He reached out a trembling hand to touch her foot. "Do not touch the anchor." The voice didn't come from her mouth. It exploded inside his skull. It was a voice made of tidal waves and crushing depth. Alaric was thrown backward. An invisible force slammed into his chest, knocking him into the water. He came up sputtering, coughing salt water. Isolde sat up. She didn't move like a human. She levitated upright, her movements fluid and unnatural. She turned her head toward him. Her eyes opened. They were no longer violet. They were pure, blinding white. There were no pupils, no irises, just the raw power of the moon staring out of a human face. "You," the voice in his head said. It sounded like Isolde, but layered with 1,000 other voices. "The King of Ruin." Alaric dragged himself out of the water, crawling onto the sand at the base of the rock shelf. He bowed his head, pressing his face into the wet grit. "Isolde," he wept, "I am sorry. I am so, so sorry." "Sorry is a word for spilling wine," the voice said. "You spilled my life." "I was blind," Alaric pleaded, daring to look up at the glowing figure. "I was deceived. Mara, she planted the papers. She told me you were the spy." Isolde looked down at him. Her expression was terrible in its neutrality. "I know," the voice echoed. "I saw her do it. I saw her slip the maps into my mattress while I swept the floors. I saw her smile when she told the guards." "Then why?" Alaric cried. "Why didn't you write it down? Why didn't you fight?" "I wrote it 3 times," Isolde said. "Mara burned the notes. She broke my fingers when I tried to sign to the general. She told me that if I struggled, she would poison the nursery herself and blame me anyway." Alaric felt the bile rise in his throat. He remembered Isolde's hands being bandaged last week. Mara had told him it was a clumsy accident in the archives. He had believed her. He had believed the woman who flattered him over the woman who served him. "I accepted the fall," Isolde continued, her glowing hair floating around her face as if she were underwater, "because I knew it was the only way to break the illusion. You were so in love with your own justice, Alaric, that you needed to see it shatter to understand what it was made of." "It is shattered," Alaric admitted, holding up his shaking human hands. "I am shattered. The pack has lost their wolves. The moon is red. The rogues are slaughtering us. We are defenseless." He crawled forward, reaching out a hand in supplication. "I beg you, not for me. I deserve to die, but for the families, for the pups you tried to protect. Give us back our spirits. Come back to the citadel. Be the anchor again." Isolde floated down from the rock. She hovered inches above the sand, approaching him. The light of her presence was so bright it hurt his eyes. She stopped in front of him. "You want the wolf back?" she asked. "Yes," Alaric whispered. "We cannot survive without it." Isolde leaned down. Her glowing white eyes bore into his soul. "You valued the wolf above the human," she said. "You valued the teeth above the heart. You looked at me, a mute, human-seeming girl, and you saw garbage. You saw a defect." She straightened up, and the cavern shook with the force of her anger. "Now you are human, Alaric. Now you are defective. Tell me, do you deserve to be thrown off a cliff?" Alaric went silent. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "No," he whispered. "No one deserves that." "Then why should I save you?" Isolde asked. The light around her flared red for a second, matching the moon outside. "Why should I anchor a pack that cheers for the murder of the weak? The rogues are monsters, yes, but at least they are honest about their hunger. You hid your cruelty behind a law book." "Isolde, please!" Alaric shouted, desperation making him bold. "They are dying. General Kale, Ilara, the children, they are being eaten alive right now." "Then let them fight as humans," Isolde said coldly. "Let them feel the fear they inflicted on me every day I walked those halls." She turned her back on him. She floated toward the mouth of the cave, looking out at the red ocean. "I am done being the anchor, Alaric. The chain is broken. I am going home to the tide." Alaric watched her moving away. He realized that apologies weren't currency here. Logic wasn't currency. He couldn't command her. He couldn't argue with her. He had to pay. He remembered the old laws, the laws before the iron claw, before the politics, the laws of blood and bone, a life for a life. Alaric stood up. He reached for the dagger at his belt, the only weapon he had left. It was a small ceremonial blade he used for cutting meat. He didn't aim it at her. He aimed it at his own heart. "Isolde!" Alaric shouted. She stopped. She turned slowly. Alaric held the dagger against his own chest, the point digging into his tunic. "You are right," Alaric said, his voice steady for the first time since the fall. "I am a hypocrite. I am a butcher, and I do not deserve to be king." He looked at her, tears streaming down his face. but they do not deserve to die for my blindness. The anchor needs blood to rebind, doesn't it? That is the old magic, a sacrifice to bridge the gap. Isolde watched him, her expression unreadable. I offer you a trade, Alaric said. My life for theirs, my soul for the pack's return. He pressed the knife harder. Blood began to stain his tunic. Take me, Alaric begged. Feed me to the moon. Just turn it white again. Give Cale his wolf. Save the pups. Isolde stared at him. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the crashing of the red waves and the dripping of Alaric's blood onto the sand. Then the white light in her eyes flickered. A hint of violet returned to the center. You would die for them? Isolde asked softly. The myriad voices were gone. It was just her voice now, rough, unused, but hers. I am their king, Alaric said. It is the only duty I have left. Isolde drifted back toward him. She reached out a hand made of solid light, and wrapped her fingers around the blade of the dagger. She didn't cut herself. Her light dissolved the steel. The dagger crumbled into dust in Alaric's hand. She placed her glowing palm against his bleeding chest, right over his heart. You finally learned, Isolde whispered. A king is not the one who holds the sword, Alaric. A king is the one who steps in front of it. She looked deep into his eyes. I will not take your life, she said, but I will take your pride. She pressed her hand into his chest. A shock wave of white energy exploded from her palm. It blasted through Alaric's body, scouring his veins, burning away the human weakness. It hurt. It hurt more than the fall. It hurt more than the severance. Scream! Isolde commanded. Alaric screamed. He threw his head back and roared. But the roar didn't end as a human cry. It deepened. It twisted. It grew fur and fangs. The red light in the cave vanished, replaced by a blinding, holy silver. Alaric fell forward onto his hands and knees. His bones cracked and reshaped. Fur, black as night, but tipped with silver starlight, erupted from his skin. He shifted, but he was not the same wolf he had been. He was massive, larger than any alpha in history, and his eyes were no longer gold. They were glowing violet. He threw his massive head back and howled. It was a howl that shook the stalactites loose. It was a howl that traveled out of the cave, up the cliff face, and across the entire kingdom. Up on the precipice, the rogues stopped mid-bite. They pricked their ears. They knew that sound. It was the sound of a god waking up. Isolde stood next to the massive wolf. She grabbed his thick fur. She wasn't floating anymore. She was solid. She was real. And she was angry. Go! She commanded, pointing up the cliff. Take back your kingdom. High above the churning sea, on the plateau of the Black Rock precipice, General Cale prepared to die. He was on his back in the mud, his human body battered and broken. A massive rot-toothed rogue stood over him, saliva dripping from its yellow fangs onto Cashel's face. The rogue growled, a low vibrating sound of anticipated pleasure, and prepared to tear out the throat of the Silver Moon's greatest commander. Cale closed his eyes. He gripped a jagged rock in his hand, a pathetic weapon for a man who used to catch arrows, and waited for the end. He didn't pray for salvation. He knew the gods had abandoned them. He only prayed it would be quick. Then the world turned white. It started as a pulse, a heartbeat of pure blinding luminance that swept across the ocean, hit the cliff face, and exploded upward into the sky. The heavy, oppressive crimson light of the blood moon evaporated instantly. The moon above which had been a glaring red eye of judgment, bleached back to a brilliant holy silver. The rogue standing over Cale froze. He looked up, confused, blinking against the sudden brightness. And then Cale felt it. It wasn't pain this time. It was a rush. It felt like liquid lightning pouring into his veins, stitching his soul back to his body. The hollow silence in his mind was shattered by the roar of his wolf returning home. "We are back!" Kyle's eyes snapped open. They weren't human brown anymore. They were flashing steel gray. He didn't use the rock. He roared, his body contorted, bones cracking and reshaping with a wet, sickening crunch that sounded like music to his ears. Fur exploded from his skin. In the span of a single heartbeat, the broken human general vanished. In his place stood a massive gray wolf, snarling with the fury of a resurrection. The rogue barely had time to widen his eyes before Coil lunged. His jaws clamped around the rogue's throat. With a savage twist of his neck, Kyle ripped the life out of the invader. All across the precipice, the miracle repeated itself. Hundreds of Silver Moon wolves who had been cowering, bleeding, and dying suddenly arched their backs. The air filled with the sound of the shift, the snap of bone, the tear of cloth, the roar of the predator. The rot-toothed rogues, who moments ago had been slaughtering sheep, suddenly found themselves surrounded by a pack of lions. And then, from the edge of the cliff, from the very abyss where their king had fallen, a shadow rose. It didn't climb. It launched. A massive shape vaulted over the cliff edge, landing in the center of the battlefield with an impact that shook the ground like a meteor strike. It was a wolf, but it was not like any wolf the pack had ever seen. It was colossal, standing a full head taller than even the largest alpha. Its fur was black as a void between stars, but the tips shimmered with a pearlescent white glow, as if the moon had dusted him with frost. But it was the eyes that stopped the battle. The massive wolf's eyes were a glowing electric violet. It was Alaric, but it was Alaric reforged. The rogue alpha, a scarred beast named Goraznaut, turned to face this new threat. He snarled, trying to assert dominance, trying to rally his confused troops. Alaric didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply opened his mouth and released a sound that wasn't of this earth. It was a harmonic resonance, a vibration that rattled the teeth of every living thing on the plateau. Kneel. It wasn't a request. It was gravity. The rogue alpha's legs buckled. He fell to his belly, whining, crushed by the sheer spiritual weight of the king's aura. Alaric moved. He was a blur of black and silver light. He tore through the rogue lines, not with cruelty, but with efficiency. He was the storm cleaning the shore. The Silver Moon pack rallied behind their king. Their fear vanished, replaced by a euphoric surge of power. They fought with a coordination they had never possessed before, as if a single mind were guiding them, and in a way it was. Because rising slowly from the cliff edge, floating on an updraft of wind and moonlight, came Isolde. She hovered 10 feet above the ground, her body glowing so brightly she was hard to look at directly. She didn't fight. She simply existed. She was the anchor, reset and dug deep. The power flowing through the pack was coming from her, channeled through the bond she had reforged with Alaric. The battle lasted 10 minutes. When it was over, the rot-toothed rogues were either dead or fleeing into the deep woods, tails tucked, terrified of the white-eyed witch and her shadow beast. Silence returned to the black rock precipice, but it wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of awe. Alaric stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. The violet light in his eyes faded to a deep, warm gold as the adrenaline ebbed. He looked around at his pack. They were injured. They were shaken. But they were whole. He looked up at Isolde, who was slowly descending to the ground. Alaric shifted. The transition was smooth, fluid. He stood up as a man, naked, bloodied, scarred, but radiating a quiet, dangerous power. A guard rushed forward to drape a cloak over his shoulders. Alaric didn't speak to his troops. He didn't declare victory. He turned his gaze to the cluster of rocks near the tree line. "Bring her to me," Alaric commanded softly. General Kale, now back in human form, nodded. He marched over to the rocks and dragged a figure out of the shadows. It was Lady Mara. She was unharmed. While the pack had been slaughtered, she had hidden. She looked impeccable, her black dress only slightly dusty. But her face was pale, and her eyes were darting around like a trapped rat. She saw Alaric. She saw Isolde glowing behind him. Mara threw herself at Alaric's feet. She grabbed the hem of his cloak, sobbing, "Oh, Alaric, thank the goddess you survived. I was so scared. The rogues, they came out of nowhere. I tried to help, but I was powerless." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her beautiful face. She reached for his hand. "And you found her," Mara gasped, gesturing to Isolde with feigned relief. "You saved the traitor. Oh, you are so merciful, my king. Perhaps we can imprison her instead of killing her. I can interrogate her again, find out why she did it." Alaric looked down at her. He looked at the woman he had trusted, the woman who had whispered in his ear while Isolde swept his floors. He didn't feel anger. He felt a cold, deep disgust. "Stand up, Mara," Alaric said. Mara stood, smoothing her dress, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. She thought her charm was working. She thought she could spin this. "Isolde speaks," Alaric said simply. Mara froze. "What?" "She speaks," Alaric repeated, "not with the tongue, but with the truth. She told me everything, Mara, the maps in the mattress, the broken fingers, the lies." Mara's face crumbled. The mask fell away completely, revealing the ugly, ambitious rot beneath. "She's a liar!" Mara shrieked, pointing a finger at the glowing woman. "She's a witch! Look at her! That's not natural! She bewitched you, Alaric. I did it for you. I did it for the throne. You needed a strong queen, not a mute embarrassment." Alaric stepped closer to her. "You wanted strength," Alaric whispered. "You despised weakness. You told me that those who cannot defend themselves deserve to be purged." "Yes," Mara cried. "It is the way of the wolf." "Then let us see how much wolf is left in you," Alaric said. He turned to Isolde. Isolde stepped forward. She didn't look angry. She looked at Mara with a distant cosmic pity. Isolde raised her hand. She pointed a finger at Mara's chest. A beam of pale white light shot from Isolde's fingertip. It hit Mara in the heart. Mara didn't scream in pain. She gasped in shock. The light didn't burn her. It invaded her. It hunted down the spirit of her wolf, the vain, ambitious beast that lived inside her, and it evicted it. Mara fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "No," Mara whispered. "No, no, no." She tried to shift. She pushed. She strained. Nothing happened. "My skin!" Mara shrieked, looking at her hands. The aging process that the pack had briefly experienced on the cliff returned to her. But this time, it was permanent. Her skin thinned. Veins appeared. Her hair lost its luster. She didn't turn into a crone, But the supernatural vitality of the wolf was gone. She was just a human woman, a middle-aged, powerless human woman. "You wanted to rule the pack," Alaric said, looking down at her. "But you cannot be part of the pack. You have no wolf, Mara. You are what you hated most. You are weak." "Kill me!" Mara screamed, clawing at the dirt. "Just kill me!" "No," Alaric said. "That was my mistake before. I thought death was the only justice. But living with your truth is a far heavier burden." He looked at General Kale. "Escort her to the southern border," Alaric commanded. "Give her a canteen of water and a day's rations. If she survives the rogues as a human, then the goddess has forgiven her. If not, then nature has taken its course." 2 guards grabbed the screaming, thrashing woman and dragged her away toward the tree line. Her cries faded into the dark, ignored by the pack she had tried to usurp. Alaric turned back to the cliff edge. He turned to Isolde. The pack watched them. Hundreds of wolves stood in silence, waiting. They looked at their king, who had violet eyes. They looked at the girl who glowed like a star. Alaric knelt. He didn't kneel to the crowd. He knelt to Isolde. He took her hand, the hand that had saved his life, the hand that had rewritten his soul. He pressed it to his forehead. "The throne is yours," Alaric said, his voice carrying in the silence. "I am just the sword. You are the queen." Isolde looked at him. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile in years. She shook her head gently. "Rise, Alaric." Her voice echoed in the minds of every wolf on the plateau. Alaric stood up. Isolde stepped up beside him. She took his hand. She didn't want to rule over him. She wanted to stand with him. She looked out at the pack. She raised her free hand, and a gentle rain of silver light fell over the injured warriors, knitting their wounds, soothing their trauma. "We are the Silver Moon," Isolde's voice projected, clear and strong. "We do not kill the silent. We listen to them. We do not throw away the weak. We carry them." She squeezed Alaric's hand. "And we never, ever forget who lights the dark." The pack threw their heads back and howled. It wasn't a howl of war. It was a song of gratitude, of balance restored. Alaric looked at the moon above. It was bright, full, and beautiful. He looked at Isolde. For 10 years, he had been the strongest alpha in the world, and he had been miserable. Tonight, standing beside the girl he had almost destroyed, he realized he wasn't the alpha anymore. He was something better. He was a mate. And as the sun began to rise over the ocean, painting the black rock precipice in shades of gold and violet, Alaric Valen vowed that he would spend the rest of his life making sure that the moon never had a reason to bleed again.